We will now continue the conversation with a fireside chat with FDA, ARPA-H, and OSTP. This fireside chat is titled A View from Washington, Building the Clinical Trials Infrastructure in the U.S. for a Healthier Future. We will have Sherry Targum from the FDA, Office of the Commissioner. We'll have Grail Sipes being a moderator for this discussion, also at the Office of Commissioner and recently at OSTP. We'll have Jennifer Roberts from ARPA-H and Catherine Young from the White House Office of Science and Tech Policy. So take it away, Grail.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Jackie, so much for that great intro. And thank you, Grace and Grace, for a high energy start to the day that was incredibly inspiring. So thank you. I have had the pleasure of working with all three of our amazing panelists in the past. And so I'm very excited about this discussion. And I'm going to dive right in. So I'd like to start by talking about how we can improve the clinical trials infrastructure, the clinical research infrastructure in this country. And when we talk about infrastructure, we're really talking about, in this context, we're really talking about a wide variety of people and places who make clinical research happen, right? Obviously, first and foremost, all the people who participate, right? And we've just started quite rightly with a focus on them. It's also all the people who design and carry out the trials. It's the institutions, the clinics, healthcare systems. It's about newer sites that we need to bring online into the research enterprise through retail networks, through communities, as Grace was talking about, the barbershops, et cetera. And so when you look across this whole spectrum, and think about how to make the whole enterprise more diverse, more equitable, and hopefully more efficient, because another major problem, as I think everyone on the call is aware, is that clinical research has just become outrageously expensive, and that's having all kinds of pernicious consequences. How do we think about improving this, making it more equitable, making it work for more Americans, and bearing in mind that we have to innovate not just in physical things and products, but we have to innovate in process and the way that things are done. There are many, many challenges in this space, but there are also, there's a tremendous amount of positive momentum and a lot of exciting things going on, which we're going to talk about. So let me turn first to you, Catherine. Catherine's at the Office of Science and Technology Policy in the White House. What do you think are some of the things that we might grab onto? What are some of the promising avenues in this space?
Yeah, thank you so much, Grail. It is wonderful to see you and to be part of this panel with so many incredible people. And also to see such a great focus on clinical trials, which I think we all know are such a vital part when we think about improving health outcomes for not only Americans, but really for people across the world. And so at the Cancer Moonshot, which is the team that I'm part of at the Office of Science and Technology Policy, clinical trials, of course, is a huge focus of our work. And as of just yesterday, hosted the first White House Clinical Trials Forum, Grail, which you were an instrumental and foundational piece of that. So thank you so much for all your work in grounding us with that. But a couple of things I just want to share that I took away from yesterday, which convened a number of experts, some of you here on this call as well, that clinical trials really provide many, many things for patients. First of all, we need clinical trials because we need the science that reflects the impacts of the therapies on the diverse populations that will use them. So we need, supported and funded physicians and scientists to be able to really conduct these clinical trials in the best way possible. We also need everyone to have access to trials if they provide the best option for their care. And so I think this is where engaging communities really comes into, especially those that are historically underrepresented in clinical trials. Because community engagement really, as we've heard before, builds that trust and ensures diverse participation, which is so important for the therapies that are developed. We also need to build trials in a way that easily reach people to ensure that they are efficient, so effective therapies can reach everyone sooner. And we know that this is an issue, especially here in the United States. So we need to look at innovative trial designs, such as adaptive trials and platform trials that allow for much more flexibility and much more efficiency than we have today. And lastly, I'll say that we need to build these systems in a way that does not just bring a trial to one person in a community, but instead builds the bridges between places where innovation happens and where community practices are. And so I think this is where data interoperability and data sharing is so incredibly important, but also where really innovative programs that I think we'll hear about today from agencies like ARPA-H that are really kind of driving innovation forward in such unique ways that is so important to reaching communities. Really, to me, this is one of the most important things as well.
And speaking of ARPA-H, Jen, would you care to comment? I know you have been knee-deep in these issues for some time and have a lot of exciting things to talk about, use cases. What would you like to add?
Yeah, I agree with Catherine. So I think as we're moving toward more of a nationwide network, we're very excited that ARPA-H is developing an effort called Accelerating Clinical Trial Readiness. And we're anticipating that there will be a solicitation out later this summer, early fall. And we're very excited about moving clinical trials more into non-traditional sites like those mentioned so far. So retail pharmacy, maybe it's the barbershop, maybe it's the local clinic, and looking at how we actually make that practically feasible. I think what we're envisioning is that we're taking advantage of the CROs that are already out there, but really expanding into these non-traditional sites and improving the data interoperability to make it so that multiple sites can work together. So if you have a trial where you're trying to reach people in a particular rural community, and it happens to be that the right way to meet that patient population is in the barbershops, then we have an organization that can reach into that part of the community. And perhaps we have another part of the country where it's the local clinic. So we have another CRO that it has expertise there, and we're making it so that we can have interoperability and a network of networks type model to be able to reach all different communities in a much more flexible way.
Yeah, and Jen, thank you so much for bringing up the data and the systems. It's an incredibly important part of this picture and of the equity piece as well, of course. Just to add one quick thing, there's a wealth of information on ARPA-H's website, but they have in this network of networks that Jen was talking about, that's, I think you're referring to ARPANET-H, which is really kind of a network of existing bringing in existing sites and helping to create the conditions for all of the innovation that ARPA-H is funding to kind of flourish in the real world. So it's very exciting. Okay, so much to talk about here. Sherry, would love to hear your perspective on any and all of this.
Well, thank you, Grail, and it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Sherry Targum, and I'm Deputy Director in the Office of Clinical Policy in the Office of the Commissioner at FDA. I can also speak from the perspective of a practicing physician, and this is a very exciting time. Efficient, well-designed clinical trials are a key focus for us and a critical element of our public health mission, which is to ensure that safe, effective medical products are available for patients. To that end, we are interested in the development of innovative trial designs and advances in technology that can enable the enrollment of a diverse study population and reduce the barriers to trial participation.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And it's incredibly important to have FDA's perspective here. Sherry and her colleagues play a tremendous role in thinking about evidence and how to get it accepted at the end of the day. And I think there's a huge amount of energy towards working to advance that. I know we're going to talk a lot more in the course of this panel and today about bringing trials closer to the point of care, decentralization, hybrid trial designs, and all of that. For now, let's turn to patient-generated health data a little bit more specifically. We had a tremendous first day yesterday, talked about a lot of aspects of this. Would love to turn to some of you to talk about your ideas on how patient-generated health data and digital health technologies in general can help support all the efforts that we have been talking about. Jen, maybe I'll start with you. Welcome comments from others as well.
So talking a little bit more about just the the health data. So the patient-generated health data is incredibly important to be able to provide more context about what's happening when the person is outside the clinic, not with the clinician. And to the extent that we can take advantage of different types of innovations with regards to wearables or apps or whatnot, it can potentially provide a couple of different benefits. One is providing more insight throughout the clinical trial. And then another is really making it so that the patients can stay more engaged and we can have more bidirectional conversations and communication throughout the whole process. So ideally, that will also help us with retention. So that's really an area that we're very interested in pursuing further.
Yeah, and as Grace Cordovano pointed out this morning, amongst many other things, it can help having that type of stream of data from patients can help reduce the administrative burden, both on on both ends of the process for the patient and for others as well. Any other thoughts, Catherine or Sherry, from you about patient-generated health data in general? It's a broad topic, but anything you would pick out?
Yeah, I would just pick up on what Jen mentioned about creating additional insights. I mean, I think this type of data can really significantly enhance clinical trial infrastructure because it does and can provide really real-time and continuous data that is just going to inform the understanding of patient health in general. And I think the other component to patient-generated health data can drive innovation. And I mean that because it starts to really distill down to that personalized and precise clinical trial component of this. And it can also, as we talk about innovative trial design, it could also support remote monitoring and the decentralized clinical trial models, which we often talk about and encourage as well. And to your point, Grail, really reduce the burden on the patient in participating and therefore making trials a little bit more accessible as well.
I just wanted to say I agree with the others from my perspective. When I see a patient in the office, it's a snapshot in time. But when the patient gets involved, and I can speak as a physician anecdotally, patients get highly engaged in their care when they are the ones monitoring their own blood pressures and glucoses. And they become more of a partner and they come asking questions. So the relationship changes in a very positive way. Furthermore, it gives me better understanding of what's going on in their lives outside the office, for example, when they're eating and sleeping. So the data can be very helpful.
Yeah, I think that's incredible and such an important point. And it also ties back to some of the things that were said this morning. And also yesterday, we had Dr. Elena Ismailova give a tremendous presentation on her research in this space, which was informed by her own experience going through a sudden and very difficult diagnosis and starting to track information about herself, how it helped her feel more empowered, and helped her kind of cope with the entire situation, as well as providing information that really directed her care. So let's turn to equity. I know this is a tremendous focus for all of us. It's a longstanding kind of issue in the world of clinical research, how to make clinical trials populations more diverse, both across racial and socioeconomic groups, across the rural-urban divide. All of this is incredibly important, and it's very challenging if you are doing a fully traditional clinical trial, because that's something that's under very controlled circumstances in a particular place. And it may not represent, it may not be convenient for people, it may not be possible for people. It may also raise issues where you're measuring things that don't reflect real world experience and real world usage. So issues from many perspectives here. Of course, we have, as was mentioned at the top, FDA has got its guidance out on diversity action plans, which is incredibly exciting, very well thought out document, which is going to be driving some activity. I think a lot of sponsors and folks in industry were already thinking about this and have already begun focusing on this aspect for their pivotal trials. Would love to hear people's perspectives, either Jen or Sherry. Maybe I'll turn to you first on how to capitalize on some of the avenues for progress that we've been talking about to really bring, to make this picture more equitable, to make it work for more people?
I can start. If you couple patient-generated health data with decentralized clinical trials, for some patients who don't have a car, live far from a research site, or have mobility issues, going to a site can be a very big burden, the travel. And so a decentralized clinical trial has the potential for decreasing that burden to participate and actually broadening the enrollment in a clinical trial. So I see it all, I see it as a piece. And I think increasing diversity is incredibly important, particularly for patients who have the disease or condition.
Absolutely. Jen, any further thoughts there?
Yes, I completely agree. And I think in order to make it so that we can move clinical trials closer to where folks live, so that we're reducing the barriers to folks participating, it's very important that we also make it so that we have the infrastructure in place that reduces the burden at point of care to participate in a clinical trial. Because right now, there's a lot of extra staff that's needed in order to run a clinical trial. It's very difficult to extract the information that's needed to provide evidence to the FDA. And the more that we can have some computational infrastructure, for example, that can make it so that that burden to the clinicians, to the folks that are in a local clinic close to where people are, or potentially in a non-traditional site, make it so that they can provide the same quality of evidence to FDA with minimal overhead. That will really help us move these clinical trials closer to where people live, so that we're addressing many of the barriers that are keeping people from participating.
Absolutely. And one thing that I've been thinking about as you all have been talking, which I think is one of the biggest opportunities, but also a big challenge here, is that as we integrate patient-generated health data more fully into research, we may be in the process of developing evidence that is really much more reflective of how people live their treatments and their diagnoses in the real world, as opposed to in a very controlled setting. Obviously, there are some types of studies which are going to need to be done in a very controlled setting. Not every study is alike, and I'm not trying to suggest that everything can be done necessarily based on patient-generated health data, though we definitely want to maximize the use of that. Any thoughts that anybody has about how to take advantage of that, knowing that it may bring us a different kind of picture on a lot of interventions than we currently have had in the past? I don't know if any of you have thoughts on that, but I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, I think, Grail, to my previous point, I think it lends itself more towards this movement of precision medicine, right? Creating this complete picture of a person. But I did want to take just a moment to really recognize the FDA when they released this new guidance yesterday about enhancing diversity in clinical trials, because I think it has components in there that really provides that guidance that encompasses everything that we're talking about here. And I really want to give acknowledgement to everybody at the FDA who has worked on this, because it really is an example of how federal agencies are moving in this direction, right? And are making critical decisions and becoming very intentional about how we think about these things. So, for example, in the guidance release, things like broadening eligibility criteria, things like encouraging flexible design trials, things like making sure to engage with patient advocacy groups. So, I mean, we heard before how important that patient voice is in this process. And then also thinking about retention strategies as well, which was brought up earlier in terms of how do we keep people on clinical trials who are really just struggling in the first place to be able to get transportation there and back. So really being able to allow them to participate in the entire thing as well. So just wanted to give that plug again for FDA and the incredible work that they're doing around this, because it is so vitally important to increase that diversity when we think about clinical trials, which to your point around this data is also so important as we collect more and more data about people in general, make sure it is as inclusive as possible.
Absolutely. And I would very much second that, except I'm at FDA, so I don't want to appear to be patting ourselves on the back, but huge thanks to everybody who worked so hard to get that out. And again, it's out for comment. So anybody who's got comments, now's the time. So what do you think might be some of the biggest barriers, either to specific things like adopting the recommendations that are in the guidance, or more broadly, what do you think are some of the barriers that we might expect to trying to implement more decentralization as a part of our clinical trial designs, bringing trials closer to care into the real world, and using patient-generated health data in people's lives and in their and in clinical research? What are you seeing as some of the biggest challenges, either from a technical perspective, from a high-level, big picture perspective? What are your thoughts on that?
Let me name a few that I see as potential hurdles. One would be, to the extent that one needs internet access and a reliable power source, that could be a hurdle. And I think that was already brought up. How, in terms of patient-generated data, for me, it depends on the complexity of the tool. So I have patients, and I actually have some elderly relatives that are not very digital savvy. So it's very different. I also have teenage children who are highly digitally savvy. But for patients that are not digitally savvy, giving them a complex tool might be problematic. And there might be some additional education, or for some populations, like patients with cognitive issues or young children, you might have to teach, there might need to be some training of caregivers to make this work. And then to trust issues, whether it's, trust that the data will be confidential, or from an investigator or regulator perspective, trust in the reliability of the tool. I see those as potential hurdles, but I do think they're solvable.
Yeah, I would totally agree with Sherry. And just to build on that, I think, ensuring that the technology that is used to be able to both collect and transmit that data needs to be done so in a very reliable and secure and user-friendly way. The infrastructure required for this, I think, to Sherry's point about high-speed internet, data storage options, the analytical tools required to really be able to make sense of this data that's collected will be really important. And then Sherry also touched on this as well in terms of the participation, in terms of the participants, but I think training for clinicians and researchers as well is going to be a really critical thing as well in order to use patient-generated health data really effectively and securely as well. And then there's probably going to be a regulatory barrier here as well, just as these new things come about, which often, are done so in an expedient way compared to regulations and policies. There's always that catch-up that has to occur as well. So it will be interesting to see how that unfolds as well.
Jen, what do you think? I know that you're going to be challenging a lot of people through your programs to sort of accomplish some of these things. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that to the adoption and the accessibility points that Sherry and Catherine were making, I think that having these approaches that are very easy for folks with different types of digital literacy levels is going to be very paramount. And then the more that we have different types of home monitoring equipment that can automatically collect the data in a way that doesn't necessarily require the user to do anything other than, know how to use the tool, you know what I mean? Put on the wearable in the appropriate way, have easy video tutorials or whatnot. But effectively, we want different types of home health technologies that can invisibly make it so that patient-generated health data can be used in a meaningful way, and one that is already fitting in with the care that patient needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's going to be there's a lot of potential for progress and a huge amount of interest in this space, as we've heard. Just listening to everything that you all were saying, it really connects up with some of the points that Grace made earlier this morning, including about, Grace was talking about how for many families that struggle within the healthcare system in general, either because of language barriers, resource barriers, or whatever, it's often the younger generation, the children and the young teens and the young adults who wind up becoming essentially the navigators, to get them through. And so, she was sort of highlighting, is there a way to kind of harness that ability? They're more tech savvy. They have the motivation to want to try to help. They're in contact, is that an avenue for helping, think about adoption or design of patient-generated health data tools. And I think that that's a really, really interesting idea. In closing, and we just have a few minutes left here, but I'd love to see if any of you have thoughts on just sort of anything we haven't covered on the role of the federal government generally. Each of you sits in an incredibly, important and influential position. Sherry, in your office, it's all things good clinical practice, regulation of clinical trials, and more involving evidence generation. Jen, obviously at ARPA-H, are on the brink of funding some really, really interesting and incredible ideas about innovation and partnering closely with the private sector, of course, and many other entities. And Catherine, of course, at the White House, at OSTP, you have tremendous insight and access sort of across the agencies and across the executive branch into what kinds of partnerships will really move the needle, and what can the federal government do? Any closing thoughts on sort of things that you think work, or things that you're looking forward to seeing more of in the future?
I would say that the R&D development on the clinical trial infrastructure side is extremely important, and the strong partnerships between the R&D agencies, so the ones that are doing that investment across the academic and commercial ecosystem, work hand in hand with our regulatory partners, so that way we're financially incentivizing innovation throughout the ecosystem, and doing that in a way where we inside the government are also working with our regulatory partners to make it practical, that the technical innovation that's happening can be used.
Terrific. Catherine or Sherry, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think to steal Sherry's words earlier, it is a very exciting time. And I think, having a seat at the Cancer Moonshot really affords the ability to see, as you mentioned, Grail, into the happenings, into agencies across the federal government, all the way from, the essential plumbing and foundation of data sharing and interoperability, all the way through how do we ensure that agencies and researchers and scientists center the patient. These are all things that are moving forward right now in a very, very, very quick way. And it's very exciting to see. And as I mentioned yesterday, we hosted a clinical trials forum, which is available online. And I would highly recommend anybody who's interested in hearing the perspectives from the director of ARPA-H, from the director of NIH, from the commissioner of FDA, in terms of what the progress is and what the vision is going forward to have a look there, because I think they'll find some very exciting things.
Yeah, it was an absolutely tremendous forum. Catherine, congratulations to you guys, and very exciting to hear about everything from Dr. Bertagnoli's plans to bring research into primary care using her networks, Dr. Califf and Renee Wegerson's comments. So yeah, and when we think about the federal government, it's investment, it's funding, it's innovation through ARPA-H and other agencies, and it's also reimbursement and access, another piece of this. So so much to talk about. Sherry, would you like to give us a last word here?
I just wanted to add a quick point, and I completely agree with my colleagues. I think for me, one of the most powerful experiences at FDA has been listening to patients. And so with all this and with continuing to develop our initiatives and, improving patient-generated health data, to also continue our dialogues with patients.
Absolutely. Tremendous commitment there on the part of the FDA and everybody else. Thank you all so much. Sorry to go. I see we're 1 minute over. I'm going to throw it back to you, Jackie, Robert, and Smit. Thank you so much to our panelists.